Hello, I'm sitting here at the chair that dedicated to George McCaffrey on the 11th hole. And before I turn this over to Dave Shillington, who's going to speak to about George and tell us some stories about him, I do have one small story about him. George was a gentleman who had very colorful language. And my son, Michael, who was in high school at the time, really enjoyed playing with him. And I remember after every round he played with George, he would come in and he'd say, "Dad, I learned a whole bunch of new words today, many of them which I can't repeat." Then I would confront George. We shared the same locker bay. I said, "George, what are you teaching my son?" And he would just smile, that little smirk of his, and let me know that he was just happy to have a part in my son's education. Michael loved playing with him. And now, over to Dave. Hello, I'm here today with Dave Shillington. Dave is a longtime club member, former club champion, and what you may not know, he's got a huge pedigree with the club. His father was our third president in 1967-68 when the club was purchased. And one thing I got to tell you about Dave, if you can get around with him, he's got to be the nicest guy at the club. So try and get around with Dave. He's just a wonderful person to play with. Dave, we're here to talk about George McCaffrey and his bench on 11. George was a character. I've played with him several times, but I know he was a good friend of yours. And I know you went a long way to get that bench done for him. Tell us a bit about George.
Yeah, sure, John. George and I both graduated from Queen's in engineering, and we ended up working at J.L. Richards. That's where I really got to know him. We were there for quite a few years, and George was a keen golfer too. He was a member out at Canada when I was at Carleton. And then there was some turmoil or whatever at Canada, and a bunch of the members were leaving and going to Mississippi and whatnot. So George joined Carleton in about 1990 or so, I guess. And he was there right up till the end. We had a regular foursome: John Goodman, Jeff Dayton, who everybody called Pussy, and myself and George for years and years. Anyway, George, I think it was it was in July of 2016, he started getting these symptoms, and it turned out he had pancreatic cancer. And unfortunately, he was gone by November of 2016. So he only probably enjoyed about 3 or 4 years of his retirement. He rose to the position of president of J.L. Richards when he retired. Oh. Anyway, after he passed there, I talked with Jeff Greenberg, and he was getting a bench for Dennis Gardner at the time. And he said, "Talk to Joel." So I talked to Joel, and Joel said, "Yeah, we can get one for George. And, where do you want it? Whatnot." And anyway, we decided that we'd put it on number 11. And as the plaque says, George has a love-hate relationship with number 11. He did great on it sometimes. Other times he put a big number up on it. But it was certainly we had a lot of fun on 11. I'll tell you. I can remember playing in our regular foursome: John and Pussy and George and I. And if George got a good drive, he'd get out, around the 150 or just past the 150. And then Pussy would start on him. Like George would say, "Okay, I'm going for it." And Pussy would start on him. "No, George, don't do it. You know what you did the last time. You're just going to hit it in the water. You can't get there, George. Put that club back and pull out a wedge. You cannot get there." And then George, he's just going a little squirrely, and of course he tells Pussy to do something to himself that's physically impossible, and the bantering just continues and continues, and then George takes a swing at it, hits it in the water, and it just starts all over again. So, but several towards the end there, he would just automatically lay up, and he was a pretty good wedge player, so he could get his wedge, 10, 12 feet or so, and lots of times he'd make par. And so he would just rub that in Pussy's nose, and they'd continue the bantering.
Didn't he
But
have that
he-
old wooden putter as well?
Yeah, I don't know where he got that, but that thing had to be older than he was. He lived and died by that thing. I don't think I ever saw him with another putter than that thing. But yeah, he was a character. He, as I said, he was president of JL Richards. He had an important job, but I think he took his stress level out on the golf course. Anybody who's played with him knows he took it pretty seriously and whatnot. And I remember another time playing. I think it was Johnny Mack and myself and George were down, and then I don't know. Do you remember Ivan Gooden? He was this little Pakistani dentist, and he was just the nicest guy you'd ever want to meet. And anyway, he put his name down with us, and then Johnny Mack had to take his name out, so Pussy put his name in. So there was Ivan and myself, who I was the only guy that Ivan knew, and George and Pussy, and they were up to their usual antics. After about 3 holes, Ivan comes up to me and he says, "My goodness, those boys use a lot of 4-letter words." I think Ivan kind of wished he had his earplugs in after that. Anyway, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
And
Jeff Gate was a character.
Yeah, he was too. But another funny story about George, he was very generous. We were on a golfing trip down in Virginia, I think it was. We used to go down, a bunch of us, and when the Masters was on, and play golf down there. And I think we were down in Williamsburg or maybe Virginia Beach, I think it was. And anyway, we found this nice little bar where they had a real rock and roll band. And anyway, George really got into the music, and he was pretty careful drinking, when he was driving. But if he was on something like this and good music and good conversation, everything, he really let his hair down. So we were all sitting around the bar. There were about 7 or 8 of us, plus a bunch of locals. And the other thing about George, when he drank too much, he seemed normal, but you couldn't understand a word he was saying. It was like he was speaking Chinese. And anyway, we're sitting around, and the bartender comes up to me, and he says, your friend is trying to talk to me, but I can't understand a word he's saying. And so I said, well, I heard him there. He said that he really likes the music and he wants to buy a round for everybody at the bar. So the bartender says, that works for me. And he went off and he started pouring all the beer and everything. And everybody toast their beer. They'd look at George, and George had no idea what was going on. And he signed his visa at the end of the night. He still had no idea that he'd paid for this massive round. So anyway, he was certainly a good guy.
Yeah, he was. Were you there the night he got his hole-in-one during men's league? Like, were you playing with him that night?
I'm pretty sure I was.
He was pretty happy after that, and it was on number 8, I believe. And I think it was the first hole-in-one that I had seen as convener, and he got the first one at men's league while I was the convener of the league.
Okay.
Very impressive, and I remember featuring him on our webpage at the time. That yeah, I was pretty happy about that. That he had that. Yeah.
He had that funny smirk on his face all the time, when he started to laugh. Yeah.
The other thing I remember about George, we all share the same locker bay. You, me, George. I come to my locker one day and I see this picture of a guy smoking a cigar, and it says the commish on the top of it, or commissioner.
Oh, he put that up in your locker?
He put that up there. It's still there today.
I know.
I have never removed it, and I'll never remove it. I hope nobody takes it down on me.
No, I thought
that was George that put that there. He also put some 4 letters down below. I'm not going to repeat what they are because they're not repeatable here, but he was the one that put that on my locker, and it's been there. I don't know, years now.
Yeah, yeah, no,
Not
as
taking it
long as
off.
I can remember. No, I thought you put that there, John.
No, that was George.
Yeah.
That
No,
was
that's a good.
George.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. So no, we miss him dearly, and I remember before every game, he would have to do these exercises because his back was always killing him.
Yeah, you'd see him on the floor in there stretching and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, it was everything he could do to get out there and play. But boy, he loved the game. He just loved the
Yeah.
game.
No, he
Did he
did. He
ever?
was a real student of the game too. He knew a lot about the game, and he loved it for sure.
Did he ever serve on a committee or a board or anything like that? But that you can recall, or because he had a lot of ideas. I mean,
Yeah.
he was an engineer, and every
Yeah.
turn he would come up with some
Yeah.
idea about how.
I know he some guys, maybe Stu Waitman and others, talked to him when there was the talk about extending the balcony,
Right.
above the driveway in
Right.
front.
Yeah.
They were going to bring him on as a structural engineer,
Yeah.
but I don't think that ever materialized too
No, it
much.
didn't. We talked
Yeah.
about it, but it never happened.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, listen, great talking with you today, Dave. And next time, everybody, you're on number 11. Remember, that was George's hole. That number 11, even when I played with him, that was his make or break hole. If he got past that 150, he was going for it. If he didn't get one, but he hated that hole.
There was another thing on number 11 I remember, and it started on like Pussy was going along. Whenever George wasn't looking, he'd pick up pine cones and stones and sticks and stuff them into his golf bag. And he had a bunch of stuff in his bag like this. And finally, when we got out to number 11, George was out in the middle of the fairway, and Johnny Goodman and I were standing off to the side, and we could see George pulling, trying to get a club. And he'd be pulling the club and the whole bag would be lifting up. He couldn't figure what was going on. John and I were just killing ourselves laughing. And anyway, he finally figured it out. And of course, he knew who did it. Then he eventually got back at Pussy somehow or other. I forget how, but
they were a pair. They were almost inseparable, those two. I mean, they did everything together. And I know George talked about him all the time. I knew we'd go out, and it was just Pussy this, Pussy that, Pussy this, Pussy that. And they were great friends, and they were Anyway, Dave, thank you very much. We had a little trouble getting on today, but certainly was worth it. And thanks for joining me. And you certainly enlightened us a little bit about George and the kind of character he was.
Yeah. Okay, good. My pleasure, John. Thanks. You.
Bye-bye, Dave.
See you.